I hope that you're praying for those in the path of this new hurricane, those in the panhandle of Florida, those in Georgia, and most of all, the dangers that come with the additional rain and flooding in the Carolinas that are still trying to come out from the floods that they've already experienced. So I hope you're praying for them, and that you'll continue to pray that God will diminish the storm, make it move quickly so that the rain doesn't continue to build up, and that the amount of damage would be minimal in the whole entire path of the storm. We've been going through some of my favorite passages of scriptures and some special notes that I wanted to make in every book of the Bible, beginning back at Revelation, going forward to Genesis, going backwards, if you will. And we've just finished up Hebrews, and now we're in the little tiny, you might even call it, as one of the commentaries I read, postcard of Philemon. Philemon is a very unusual letter, if you will, postcard, if you will. One chapter, just a handful of verses. And yet it teaches such an incredibly important lesson. Philemon was the owner of slaves, and he had a runaway slave who perhaps even took some of Philemon's property. And he had made his way to Paul. Paul had either found out that Onesimus was a believer, or that he became a believer under Paul's ministry. And as a result of that, after a time of recognizing the value of Onesimus, he recognizes that he really does belong to Philemon. Philemon is a believer. Philemon is a place that had hosted Paul in his missionary journeys, and church had been held at Philemon's place, written around AD 60. And now Paul was making an appeal to Philemon. First he says, I have a commendation of the love that I know you have, Philemon. And I want to make intercession on behalf of Onesimus. And I want to be sure that you know that I have a confidence that you'll be obedient to the teachings of Christ in this request that I make. What was this request? Well, it wasn't just a request for him to forgive. And we only have to stop here for a moment and think about Judge Kavanaugh. Let us assume, for lack of evidence, that Kavanaugh was totally innocent of the charges that were brought by several women, but in particular Ford. And let us assume that he was totally innocent, and that he was not only innocent, but he was badgered, and that he was criticized, embarrassed by many of the senators who sat in his hearing. And now Kavanaugh has to find it in his heart to forgive. You know, it's easy for us to say that we have forgiveness until it's put to the test. And without a doubt, that forgiveness is being put to a test with Kavanaugh. I can remember a number of hateful things that were said to me when I was an associate on the church staff by some of the older members of the church, when I said that I would like to be considered to be the pastor of that church. I can remember some of the hateful, or at least insensitive words that were spoken to me about my lack of experience as a pastor. And yet it would only be a few years before the very same people were asking me if I would come back and be their pastor. It would have been easy to say, in my heart and in my mind, you got what you asked for. You had some bad pastors, and you recognize that I made a good pastor at another church, and now you want me back, and there's no way I'm going to come back and bail you out. But that's not what I said in my heart. I said what they meant for evil, God meant for good. He placed me in a church that I served for 27 years. And I have no ill feelings towards that church or the members more specifically that were less than kind to me at the time. And here we have Onesimus, who has wronged Philemon, and yet Paul tells him to forgive. Not only to forgive, but to receive him back as a brother in Christ. And he has a confidence that Philemon will do this because he is following and faithful to the teachings of Christ. What are the teachings of Christ? We find here in verses 16 and 17, not as a slave, but as a beloved brother, just as if you would receive me, Paul says. What did the Lord say in Matthew chapter 6, verse 12? Forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. You have some ill feelings towards someone? Maybe it's time to forgive. Maybe it's time to forget. Maybe it's time to receive them back into your hearts and lives as brothers in Christ. Easier said than done, I realize that. Been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Nevertheless, it's the teachings of Christ. And if we're going to be Christians, not in words only, but also in deed, we need to find forgiveness for others. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.